Ladies and gentlemen of the internet, okay, we need to talk about the government shutdown because we are in day 2 of it. It started yesterday. People are going crazy. News outlets have been just nonstop about this. And as your average person in the United States, I have no idea what a government shutdown actually is. So what we're going to do is I'm going to educate myself on what a government shutdown is, what is causing this current government shutdown. And we're actually going to be watching a couple of different videos from creators like CNBC, CNN, a couple of independent creators on what this shutdown means, how is it affecting people, and all of that. Because to me, as someone who is a regular citizen of the United States, a government shutdown has been something that's been threatened for a long time. I've seen it like years ago during the Biden. I seen it years ago during the Biden administration where they were talking about a potential government shutdown. Apparently, the last shutdown was back in 2018, and to me, this just seems like a bunch of hoopla between the left and the right and politicians just wanting to blame each other for everything. And if you look at this one, it's nothing different. The left wants to blame the right for causing the government shutdown and people being furloughed from jobs. The right's blaming the left for using the government shutdown as a ploy to get certain things passed, certain legislation passed. And all I care about as a U.S. citizen is the fact that this is leading to hundreds of thousands, probably even millions of people getting furloughed from their jobs, which means ain't no money coming in, and those essential workers that are still there are actually not getting paid to work. And I know this firsthand because one of my best friends, she works for TSA, and she told me every time that there was a threat of a government shutdown for the last, I think she's been with TSA now almost 3 years, about as long as I've been with my current job. She always says if the government ever shuts down, that means she's still gonna have to work, but is not getting paid until the government's back in session. And you know what's crazy? That doesn't affect the politicians, because the politicians make well over 6 figures in their jobs. A lot of them have well over millions of dollars in the bank or in their net worth. But then you have these essential workers, these federal workers, your TSAs, your post office workers, everybody who works for the federal government. They're not making the amount of money that these politicians make. So they're the ones really suffering when the government shuts down. Politicians are fine. But, for the sake of needing to educate myself more on what this topic is, I decided to utilize AI. I've asked both ChatGPT, I've asked both Grok. I wanted to know exactly what a government shutdown means. I wanted to know what is causing this current government shutdown, and I wanted to know the effects that it has on people. So, going over to ChatGPT, I simply asked it this simple prompt. I said, can you explain to me the premise behind the government shutdown, including its effects on federal workers, general population, and the cause of the current shutdown that we're seeing today? Because, day 2 of this. And this is what I got back. The U.S. federal government operates on a budget set via appropriations bills passed by Congress and signed by the president. If Congress fails to pass or extend those bills or short-term continuing resolution, which is something you hear about over and over again, then the government has no legal authority to spend money for many of its functions. It's basically what ChatGPT is trying to say is that every year the government has a budget and they have to approve said budget before they can spend money. And if both sides can't come to an agreement on the budget, because I believe in Congress you need like 60 votes in the Senate in order to actually pass a bill or a continuing resolution or anything like that, they're not getting it. So that's what causes this, The key legal backbone is the these are words that I don't even know. The Anti-Deficiency Act, which generally prohibits agencies from obligating or spending funds in advance of its appropriation. So when funding lapses, many operations must stop or scale down. Meaning, if budget ain't passed, you don't got a right to spend that money. And if you can't spend that money, things got to slow down. Okay, easy to understand so far. Not everything shuts down. Agencies and functions deemed essential or exempted, including national security, law enforcement, air traffic control, others get furloughed. That is, employees are sent home without pay until funding is restored. And those essential workers actually still have to continue working and doing their jobs. Air traffic control, law enforcement, like I said, TSA has the same thing. But they don't get paid until the whole thing is resolved. At least that's according to what my best friend told me, who works for TSA. So, in short, without funding, lots of federal work stops, essential services carries on, and non-essential work gets a forced pause. Okay. Effects on federal workers, the public, and the economy. So, breaking it down by group. Furlough versus exempted work. Workers in non-essential roles are furloughed, told to not work until funding is restored. Workers in essential roles must continue working, but often without immediate pay until Congress fixes the fundings. Now, I know what a lot of people want to say when it comes to this. Oh, but they'll get that pay back retroactively once government funding is restored. That's all well and dandy, but here's the thing. Rent is still going to be due on the first no matter what. Bills are still going to be due. You may be able to call some people that you owe money to bill-wise and say, hey, I'm a federal worker. I've been furloughed. There's no money coming in. And sometimes they'll be nice and, waive any fees or won't disrupt your services because of this. But a lot of them will, because if there's no money, there is no service. So unfortunately, the government deciding to shut down affects these workers' day-to-day lives. But let's keep going with this. Back pay and hardship. In many past shutdowns, once funding returns, government has authorized retroactive pay for furloughed federal employees. We just spoke about that. That's all well and dandy. But that doesn't help them during the shutdown weeks themselves. Some will face real cash flow problems. Rent, bills, food. You still need these things to survive on a day-to-day basis. And what about an emergency fund? Well, guess what? Over 50-60% of people don't even have the money to cover a $1,000 emergency. And that's maybe one emergency. Probably a car problem, a quick health scare, things like that. We are talking about people who will end up going days, weeks, maybe even months without a paycheck from their jobs. And what are they supposed to do? But keep it going. Benefits and job status. Benefits like health insurance often continue during a shutdown for many employees, which means there's some employees that it probably doesn't. Though administrative support may be strained, employees may be eligible for unemployment compensation under certain conditions. Now, I wonder what those conditions actually are. Do you have to be furloughed in order to get unemployment, meaning you were sent home and you're not working? Because I have a hard time believing that if you are deemed an essential employee, that you got to go to work without pay, come home, and that you could collect unemployment benefits. Because the way the government is probably going to see that is that you're double dipping, because you'll get the retro pay and the unemployment benefits. So I don't think that that's going to work. So what else? If a shutdown is prolonged, there's risk of further negative consequences, morale, retention, delays in promotions, etc. Now, this is something that we're going to talk about later, because a lot of the videos, or at least two of the videos that we're going to be showing today and reacting to, has to do a lot with President Trump's plan to... Sorry, I realize this is so loud. Hold on. Okay, I think that'll work. So a lot of this has to do with Trump's plan to essentially minimize the government, meaning that if the government shuts down, and it's a prolonged shutdown, some people that are federal workers will probably just say, screw this, I don't need this job, I'm going to go find something else. Which, who does that benefit? The president, who came into office wanting to shrink the size of the federal government and agencies that were deemed like non-essential, really. this is the same presidency that has also said that we're going to get rid of the Department of Education. Now, I don't lean too heavy one way or the other. I don't normally like to get into politics, but you have to know like some of the intentions of politicians at times, because they're the ones that affect our day-to-day lives in this country. So if you tell me that there is a government shutdown and it can be prolonged, and there's a chance that people will quit their jobs while they're going through this process, well, that's giving the administration exactly what they want. That is shrinking the government. So is this like something that is planned? Is this something that is done on purpose? It's a possibility. You can't say that, oh, the government automatically does not want to go through any kind of shutdown. They don't want to furlough employees, because it may be true on the surface, but deep down underneath, if it is getting to their overall goal, then they'll just be like, hey, a win's a win for us. But let's keep going. All right. General population. So this is the one that people need to start caring about, because I'm talking about like the federal employees and all of that. This does affect you and me as well. So general population and public services. Shutdowns ripple through everyday life. Here's what commonly happens. Disrupted services is number one. Many federal agencies' operations slow or stop. Permitting, licensing, non-emergency functions, research, regulatory, enforcement. But I really want to talk about permitting, like real quick before we move on. Because didn't we just have like a raging wildfire in California? Isn't there a bunch of people who lost their homes because of that? Is there people who are trying to rebuild their homes? Well, guess what they won't be able to get now if the government is shut down, or actually because the government is shut down. They will not be able to get permits or licenses in order to do the work. So a process that already takes forever is now going to take even longer. Programs with non-mandatory funding, WIC, nutrition assistance programs, may quickly run out of money. That means everybody who is on WIC, who is on food stamps, if the shutdown is prolonged, then that means no money's coming in. No money's coming in. That means no money needs to go out. So I don't even mean to say no money's coming in. I just mean like there's no money to go out, which means some people's food stamps may get shut down. But I feel like this program is so funded that it would take a very prolonged shutdown in order for that to happen. Ooh. Okay. What else? Passport, immigration, visa processing may slow down. Travel gets hit. TSA, air traffic control, CBP continue, but staffing shortages or absenteeism can cause delays, longer lines, or cancellations. Now, it already feels like it takes long to travel. The airline industry will likely take a hit if this is prolonged, because there's only but so much time that air traffic controllers and TSA can take working basically for free. Like, they're going to work this little bit of time thinking that it's just going to be a couple of days, a couple of weeks. But if you get to that month and further and there's nothing, no money coming in, a lot of them may quit. And air traffic control is a good career, but when you're not getting a paycheck, it's easy to leave. So a lot of this that we're seeing, at least from ChatGPT, is about how it affects both the federal workers and us as a general population, because the federal workers are not making money. The federal workers are not working, or they're either not working or they're not making money while they're working. And unfortunately, that trickles down to the everyday person, because if they're not working, our services get slowed down. If they're working for free and end up quitting, our services are completely stopped. But don't take my word for it. I'm just a guy on the internet. Why don't we take it to some bigger creators? So Grok is pretty much going to tell us the same thing. I asked Grok what was this all about, and this was really over a healthcare plan that the Democratic Party wants to add into the continuing resolution. And the Republican side, the majority side, when it comes to the Senate, don't want to do it for a variety of reasons. I don't get too deep in the weeds over that. All I want to say is this. Why are we dealing with issues in Congress all the time where Congress wants to add a bunch of stuff in one bill or one package with like a bunch of things in it? I am a believer, as someone who is not entirely on one side or the other, that we do need to have single issue bills where the healthcare bill, we need that on its own so we can discuss it, we can read through it, because as people like you and me, as voters, we should have the right to see exactly what these packages are and not get scared off by the fact that it's under 1,000 pages worth of stuff. Keep it to one page, not one page, keep it to one bill, make that public so we can see it, and so Congress, y'all can talk about that separately. And then the continuing resolution be its own thing. Why? Because we need the continuing resolution in order to keep the government funded, even temporarily, so that way y'all can get this budget intact. And then we can tackle the healthcare issue separately. I don't care what is in that healthcare bill that's stopping this whole thing. I care about the fact that there are people that are working for free, if not working at all right now. So, government, fix your stuff. But I will leave it at that point. So don't take my word for it. We have a couple of video options here that we'll take a look at. Ooh, this was something else. And the first one we're going to dive into is from the Money Instructor. We're going to talk about the government shutdown, how it affects things like paychecks, benefits, services, how all these things are going to be at risk. So let's get right into this video.
Good to see you here. Let me ask you, did you know that since 1976, there have been about 20 funding gaps in the U.S. budget process, but only around half of those actually turned into full shutdowns, where large numbers of federal workers were furloughed? And
sorry, this is the part that I keep saying. The government shutdowns, it's been something that's been a threat in Congress for years. We haven't seen one since December of 2018. But if you turn on any news outlet, no matter who's in power, whether the Democrats are in power, whether the Republicans are in power, whether we're having a Democratic president or Republican president, you'll always hear about, oh my gosh, there's going to be a government shutdown because these two sides can't get into an agreement on the budget or about certain resolutions being in there. And I'm just like, you all work for the same country. You all want the same thing overall, and that is for the United States to succeed. Why do we constantly get into this thing every year, 2 years, 4 years, where you want to cost regular Americans their jobs because you want to have a pissing contest between the two sides? Never fully understood this.
Here's the part that surprises a lot of people. Every single time it happens, the effects ripple out far beyond Washington. We're talking about paychecks, services, and everyday life being thrown off balance. It's not just a headline on the news. It's something that can touch your family, your neighbors, or even you. So stick around with me, because understanding how the...
I didn't realize that this was like really just the ultimate AI video, so I do apologize if AI content is not your thing. But we're gonna go right through this video and then we'll move on to the next topics. But I'm still gonna be giving my 2 cents as we hear along about this.
This works and what it really means can help you feel a little more prepared for this. Before we get too far, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever personally felt the effects of shutdown, like waiting longer for something you needed, or maybe knowing someone who missed a paycheck? I'd love for you to share that in the comments. It really helps others see they're not alone. So let's start with what exactly a shutdown even is. The government runs on money that Congress has to approve each year. Think of it like paying the electric bill. If you don't pay, the lights go out. In this case, if lawmakers can't agree on a spending bill, funding stops for what's called non-essential operations. That doesn't mean the whole government disappears, but it does mean a lot of things grind to a halt. Now, what does this mean in real terms? Well, for federal workers and members of the military, it often means missed paychecks. Many of them are still considered essential, which means they must continue to show up for duty even while their pay is delayed. Think about TSA agents at the airport, air traffic controllers, border agents, or firefighters on military bases. The work continues, but the paycheck may not show up on time.
Now imagine this, being a TSA agent, and their hours, some of them can be horrible. Like, my friend is a TSA agent here in New York, and she sometimes works shifts that span from like 4 a.m. to 12 noon or 3 to like 11, shifts like that, where it's like either you're up at the crack of dawn or you're spending your entire day at the airport. And imagine doing all of that and not getting your paycheck for some time. Like, people like you and me, we get up in the morning, and I know everybody has felt this way at least once in their job, where you get up in the morning, you have that feeling like you don't want to go into work or you want to quit your job and all of this. But the thing you and I may take for granted is the fact that our paychecks are pretty much guaranteed, unless the company goes belly up that we work for. For the federal government, if Congress decides that they want to shut down the government and they can't come to an agreement on a budget, these people who are federal workers, while typically pretty safe in their jobs, don't get paid or get furloughed and have to go home until this is all resolved. So just imagine going through that and having your paycheck not only in the hands of your direct supervisor, aka your boss or your company, but also based on the federal government and their back and forth attacks against each other.
A tough, stressful job, like keeping the skies safe and not knowing when your paycheck is coming. That's the reality during these periods. And it doesn't stop there. If you're wondering about Social Security, Medicare, or Veterans Health benefits, those still continue because they're funded separately. But here's the catch. The people who answer phones, fix errors, or process new applications may be furloughed. That means delays. So, yes, your check still comes, but if something goes wrong with it, good luck getting it fixed quickly. And guess what? That's one of the most common concerns I hear in the comments. People saying, will my Social Security check stop? The answer is no, but services slow down, and that matters too. Food assistance programs are another area that gets hit. SNAP, which provides food help to millions of households.
Okay, I don't know about y'all, but to me, this AI content is boring. It's trying to play on emotion, and I don't check these videos. I just pick videos based on like if they're related to the topic, and then I just line them up and watch them for the first time the way y'all are right now. And I'm bored with this content already. So we're going to move on to Breaking Point, and we're going to actually hear a news outlet about what this shutdown means. And this was taken the day before the shutdown began. So I believe the shutdown officially was on the 1st. So this was on the 30th.
Turning now to domestic politics, the government does shut down today at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. No end in sight. Now, currently, it does look like that's where things are going. Of course, things could change. There was a high-stakes meeting at the White House immediately after Prime Minister Netanyahu left. The House Democratic Majority Leader and House Democratic Leader Senate Leader Chuck Schumer came to the White House for a quote negotiation, where basically the Trump White House told them, give us what we want, or you're going to shut down the government. The Democrats effectively said the same thing. Immediately afterwards, both sides kind of came to the microphone to lay out.
And this is the issue I have with the government, period. Like, it's just a big old, contest to see who wants to be in charge. Like, why are we as a country on two different sides basically saying, give us what we want or we're going to shut down the government, or give us what we want or this is going to happen? Like, the problem I have when it comes to the U.S. on a political side, and this is the problem I have with politics, period. It's the fact that you could be a politician in the same country, but because of your internal beliefs or because of the beliefs of your constituents, or because of what side of the aisle you're on, you're automatically like in some kind of divided race against each other. You're competing against each other for power when your goal should be the prosperity of the country by which you represent. I don't understand how that is so difficult. But I think it's really because the people on each side of the aisle really feel like they have their own vision of how the U.S. should be run or how the U.S. should be. And unfortunately, you're like on this like picture perfect-esque thing that is never going to exist, no matter what side of the aisle you're on.
Their view of everything that's going on. Here was the Republican response from the Vice President, J.D. Vance. Let's take a listen.
We just had a very frank conversation with the Senate and House Democratic leadership. Look, the principle at stake here is very simple. We have disagreements about tax policy, but you don't shut the government down. We have disagreements about healthcare policy, but you don't shut the government down. You don't use your policy disagreements as leverage to not pay our troops, to not have essential services of government actually function.
All right, so, yeah.
Which, and I've seen a little bit more of that clip. I can't believe I'm saying this. I agree with JD Vance on this, and I just said it earlier. I agree for having single issue bills where Congress can make the decision on healthcare, on taxes, on whatever they want, but do it one at a time. I don't care if it takes longer, but I'm tired of hearing that things are at a standstill with the country, or that the government shuts down like it is now because you want to stack up a bill with like this, that, and the third on there. I don't understand what's the point of that.
Funny to hear Republicans take that position now. Everybody,
Everybody says it.
Everybody said. Sorry, let me also say this. While I did say I agree with JD Vance's take there, I also know that both sides of the aisle use this excuse every time. Like, I've seen it when the Biden administration was in power. I've seen it when the Trump administration was in power. I've seen it when the Obama administration was in power. Like, no matter who is in the seat, no matter who is in charge or in the leadership role when it comes to Congress, this excuse gets tossed around back and forth between both sides. That's why I equally criticize both sides of the aisle on this.
When they're in power, I don't even know what to say. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. That's what every executive has always said about a government shutdown, and what the opposition has always said. That is precisely the point of actually using your leverage of power. But anyways, here was Chuck Schumer, what he had to say in terms of what he laid out. Let's take a listen.
He laid out to the president some of the consequences of what's happening in healthcare. And by his face and by the way he looked, I think he heard about them for the first time. The closing of rural hospitals. The fact that so many clinics are closing. And I don't know if he knew this before, but the fact that people will pay $4,000 more a year, $400 more a month, close to $5,000 more a year on their healthcare premiums if we don't do anything. And people don't know what to do. The average working family can't afford that. I told him how I met a mother who was crying to me because her daughter had cancer. And what has happened with healthcare, with what they have done, she's going to watch her daughter suffer and maybe die. And so he seemed to, for the first time, understand the magnitude of this crisis. And we hope he'll talk to the Republican leaders and tell them we need bipartisan input on healthcare, on rescissions into their bill. Their bill does not have they never talk to us. Thune didn't negotiate with me. Johnson didn't negotiate with Hakeem. And on the key issues, the Appropriations Committee, which has talked about 3 of the smaller bills, they're good bills, they said the appropriators couldn't agree and said, kick it up to the 4 leaders. They still haven't talked.
Then deal with that separately. Again, I will keep saying this until I am blue in the face. This is what you represent. This country right over here. Your first priority is to make sure that this country is running effectively, efficiently, and striving. Why are we going back and forth about a health bill, which we do need to worry about? It is important. But why are we talking about this when at the same time of a government shutdown? We can tackle these separately at the same time. Congress, you guys take enough days where you're out of service, essentially. Why don't you come back to DC and you talk about both of these separately? You know, take a couple hours and talk about the continuing resolution. Take a couple hours and talk about healthcare reform. Why are you trying to stick all of this in one? I never fully understood this. Like, why is this like a thing?
So there you go. The Democrats are centering here on healthcare and some of the consequences of the one big beautiful bill. But as we extensively discussed yesterday, they kind of backed their way into this. Basically, the base wants a shutdown, so they're going to shut down. So what they did is they poll tested their best messages, and they said, this is what we're going to shut down the government about. And look, I mean, you know, kind of smart. It's what the Republicans did in 2013 and elsewhere, and it does set up the stakes for some sort of high-stakes negotiations. The ultimate question, though, and that's where my money was, is...
And this is the problem. You're using a government shutdown, and I say this on both sides. I say this against Democrats and I say it against Republicans. You use a government shutdown as a leverage tool for a negotiation when at the same time you are basically costing people their livelihoods, because those who get furloughed, those who are deemed essential and have to wait on their paychecks, they are the ones that are going to suffer on the day-to-day because you want to use this as a negotiating ploy. It's ridiculous.
Will Chuck Schumer cave? And yesterday, he looked pretty close to caving. Let's put this up here on the screen just to give you all a little bit of a rundown of what happened. Initially, Chuck Schumer and his team came out and floated to the press that maybe what they would do is something called a 7 to 10 day CR. A CR is called a continuing resolution. What it would have done is continue to fund the government at the same levels for 7 to 10 days while they reach some sort of negotiation. However, immediately there was outrage from a lot of Democrats saying, oh my God, look, he's already caving. And
I want to know specifically, is that outrage from Democrats as in everyday Americans, you know, the people that vote for these politicians, or is this from the Democrats in Congress? Because there is a very big difference. I'm pretty sure if I grouped up Democratic everyday voters, people in the US who work a day-to-day job, and I asked them, hey, would you support a 7 to 10 day continuance, because I'm not calling it continuing resolution. Like, I'm going to make this as simple to understand as possible. A continuance where the government continues to work, it's continuing to be funded, government programs continue to be funded, people who work for the government continue to get paid their regular checks for 7 to 10 days while Congress continues their little negotiations, or not. And I'm pretty sure a majority of them will vote in favor of that. I personally think it's the myriad of people we have in the government, in Congress, in the Senate, House, whatever you want to call it, who are Democratic representatives, basically people in government. How do I say this? Basically politicians. Sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought as I say this because I talk so fast. It's basically the politicians that are like, no, you're caving, we don't want this, da-da-da. And Chuck Schumer can be voted out of his position in favor of another politician, which we may see with AOC in the future. So that's what I really think this is about. I don't think it's voters that are saying that he's caving and whatnot. I think it's actual politicians saying this.
He came out and he said, actually, I won't support a 7 to 10 day CR. He also bashed media speculation about that trial balloon, which he literally floated himself. But let's all just move past that a little bit. The point remains that the government's probably going to shut down as of right now. Again, we're recording this in the morning. Things certainly could change and they could cave, but that's where things are going. So now it becomes more of a question about the politics of it. As we laid out extensively, the Democratic base wants to shut down. They just want Trump to suffer. The Republican base also kind of wants a shutdown. What the Trump administration is setting themselves up for is they're like, hey, great, now we can just fire a ton of federal workers. They have total discretionary authority. They could probably figure out a way to keep ICE and the military going. They don't care, right, about government services and the rest. They're like, cool, this is actually what we want to do. We didn't even want to fund the Department of Education. So it'd be kind of like a return to Doge almost in the initial days of the administration.
Ooh, I gotta take a break from this. I will be right back. I had to take care of some stuff. All right, let's get back into this video.
That is kind of what I think is going to be the biggest sticking point for a lot of the Democrats who are institutionally in power because, you know, they're addicted to norms and to institutions and to bureaucrats. And so I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one. I don't know how this one's going to shake out.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to say about it. So first of all, it does feel like a bit of a role reversal because most of the shutdown fights have come from the Republican side, and they're the ones who really pioneered like the brinksmanship. It used to be just
Completely agree. It is a government shutdown is just nothing more than a tactic. It's what each side uses, the ones that want the shutdown because they want to get something passed. And they make that threat in order to get people to actually give them what they want.
sort of automatic, like, of course you fund the government. Of course you're not going to just have the government shut down. There was another, incident in the 90s, but by and large, it's been sort of like the modern Republican Party that has really pioneered this kind of like debt ceiling and government shutdown brinksmanship. And usually it's the Democrats who are out there warning, like, hey, if you do this, you're going to have all sorts of consequences, like things that people rely on for the federal government that are not going to be there for them. The longer that it goes on, the more tenuous those services become. So it's been kind of funny to watch like Mike Johnson go out and laud the importance of the federal government and all of these government programs, and at the same time as literally today 100,000 federal government employees are resigning because of that. You guys remember
100,000 federal employees, like 100,000 people quitting their jobs in the current job market that we're in, where it's ridiculously hard to even find a job right now, let alone find a job that has the same benefits and the same job security that working a federal job through the government actually provides. So that tells you just how ridiculous these things are, like these government shutdowns.
back in the day, that fork in the road email.
Yeah.
So there was the deal then was basically you get to not work and get paid for a number of months. That time period has expired. So today is the day that 100,000 federal government employees are resigning, and were essentially, sort of like pressured to leave the government. And
that gives the Trump administration exactly what they want. They want a shrinking government, which is like an essential pillar of more conservative voters and more conservative bases. They want limited federal government intervention, which means smaller federal government. What's a way to make smaller federal government? Is having people quit, resign, mass layoffs, things like that. If you remember the election, Vivek Ramaswamy really he really leaned hard on shrinking the federal government, basically saying like he would even go as far as to make it based on your social security number. If the last digit on your social security number was an odd number, goodbye, even number, you say. And that's like a 50% shrinkage right there, supposedly. But this is what I got. This is basically leaning into what I said earlier. The 100,000 people quitting is exactly what this current administration wants, because they want a smaller, more limited government. So shut down, even though it's bad, even though I think it's hypocritical on both sides that they are talking out of each side of their mouth on whether they want or don't want a shutdown, it's ultimately giving the current administration exactly what they want, exactly what their goal was.
This has been a very radical administration in terms of destruction of core government functions. That's been a lot of what they've been about. Russ Vought, of course, as being one of the primary architects here. Elon Musk was the public face of it, obviously, with Doge. But a lot of this work, even as Doge has faded into the background, has continued. And Russ Vought said very clearly, like, he wants to make government employees suffer. He wants to put pressure on them and get them to leave and force them out and cut their jobs and all of that. So that has been continuing apace. They see it, people on his side see this as another excuse to accelerate the stripping of government and the firing of government employees that they aren't particularly fond of to begin with.
Havana. Over here, girl. Sorry, our dog gets a little nervous around people when people are at the door.
So at the same time that you got the Mike Johnsons of the world out there singing the praises of various federal government programs, behind the scenes, the actual work that is being done is to gut those programs and make them sort of fall apart.
Yeah, it is kind of ironic.
Yeah.
Because look, they obviously want to shut down. They would love. What do you think? What do we know about the first Trump administration or the second Trump administration? They love unilateral power, right? Well, the shutdown, in a lot of ways, as I explained for the Obama administration, you have almost unilateral power in how to decide how to shut down. So, for example, you get to decide who's essential and who is not. If you're not from DC, this is a fun game where people who are, quote, essential still have to come to work, whether they are being paid or not. But everybody who's not essential, you get to hang out. A lot of the bars around here do like shutdown happy hours. Let's be honest, a lot of federal government employees like it because they get back pay and they don't have to work. And so what happens is that it kind of becomes this great game of the executive who gets to decide and not. This time around, they're like, listen, we're just going to fire people because the gives us authority to basically come in and say, well, in order to keep with the budget, etc., that's what we're going to do. Russ Vogt, as you said, he's the
That's even worse, honestly, where if you're intentionally basically saying like, oh yeah, well, we can't come to a resolution, so instead of furloughing you, instead of having you deemed essential so you could work and we'll retroactively pay you later, we're just going to fire you. That is horrible.
budget director actually went on Steve Bannon's show to lay some of this out. Let's take a listen.
I don't think anyone should be afraid of a government shutdown. I managed it for President Trump. We made it as painless as possible, consistent with the law. And it's actually what's necessary to pass these bills individually, is because how else are you going to get moderates to vote for spending cuts if they're not up against the fact that they need to pass these things to get out of a shutdown themselves? So I think there should be no talk about a stopgap measure at this point. They need to be focused squarely on moving these bills.
So there you go. We're not afraid of a shutdown. They're going to use so. It's actually a question of politics. The politics of this initially are actually pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and put C6, please, up on the screen. So there was some initial polling that was released here that shows, with the 48 hours to go, quote, Republicans haven't entirely won the blame.
Wait, hold up. Scoop. New polling shows more voters will blame Republicans over Democrats if a shutdown happens. Comes as both sides today are staying the course, convinced they'll win their message with less than 48 hours to go. More voters will blame Republicans over Democrats if a shutdown happens. Why? Because Republicans are the ones in power. They are the ones that have the presidency. They are the ones that have the majority in, is it in the Senate or in the House? They have a majority in one of the two sides of Congress. And of course, most of the Supreme Court is nominated or voted by Republicans. Whatever. So if something goes wrong, everything becomes a Republican's fault. The same way, if we have a Democratic president, like we did with Biden and his administration, everybody blamed the Democrats for everything. Why? Because we had a Democratic president in office. And then when you have a case where the presidency is one party, Congress is majority another party, then everybody starts blaming each other and nobody knows what role does what. And it's one of the most annoying things when it comes to politics. What's going on here? 2 Delta. Whoa. This is going to be the longest 4 years of our lives. Maybe it's a... Sorry, I'm reading something because my girlfriend sent me a TikTok about a plane, 2 Delta passenger planes collided in a terrifying smash in a New York airport. And I bet you the comment sections are about the shutdown and people who are quitting with air traffic control and all of that. Listen, if those passenger planes were actually in the air, that simply means that air traffic control told them they were clear to take off. Or we just didn't have enough air traffic controllers to help guide them. I'm not going to blame one party or another for that. I'm just simply going to say that this is the result of a shutdown, and this is a result of the entire political climate. This is politicians wanting to play games, and these are the results of the games that they want to play.
Game with voters. A new Morning Consult poll that was shared with Playbook reports that 45% of voters are more likely to blame Republicans if there's a shutdown, compared to 32% blaming Democrats. That's some 13-point margin. The split does get wider when looking at independent voters.
going back to this split, we shouldn't even have this split. 100% of us should be blaming 100% of our politicians if, when, or while there is a government shutdown. Now that there's a shutdown, I blame 100% of our politicians. Why? Because they want to push to get certain things that they want passed, and some people don't want to get them passed. And now we have to deal with the consequences of the ever-loving fight between red and blue, Democrats, Republicans, politician A versus B.
Who would be more likely to blame Republicans by a 17-point margin. This was some 2,000 voters that were surveyed last week. Quote, as is nearly always the case with shutdown, all parties will come out looking worse, at least for a brief period of time, was what they said. Republicans should also understand there's a palpable perception amongst voters that their majority status in Washington renders them responsible. This is something that Democrats always have to contend with under Obama as well. GOP voters, they say, are more likely to blame their own party than Democrats are. Of the people surveyed, 33% of GOP voters would blame Republicans, 22% would say they would blame the Democrats. Democrats say that they have been banking their shutdown strategy on a thesis that voters will blame the party in power. Democratic leaders have seen a similar trend across their polling and heard from voters on the ground. They are in charge. They have the House, they have the Senate, they have the president.
I didn't need a poll to believe that part about people are more likely to blame the party in power for a government shutdown. That is just common sense. If you really pay attention to how people are when it comes to politics, every time something goes wrong, they blame the party that is in charge of the White House. I watched for 4 years during the Biden administration. Every little thing was Biden's fault. It was the Biden administration's fault. I've seen in the last, year or however long Trump has been president, everything has been, it's the Trump administration's fault. It's Trump's fault. It's the right's fault. We as people are just going to constantly blame whoever is in power for every little thing, even if it's another government entity that makes these decisions. Any law that gets passed, any budget that has to get passed, it doesn't come from the White House. It comes from Congress. And nobody wants to blame Congress for some strange reason.
That means that they're the ones who have to push the government. And then finally, the Democrats finally centered on the healthcare issue as one that is the most poll tested for what they eventually come around to. There's a couple of big question marks here for shutdown politics. First is who gets the initial blame. Now, initially, from what I remember covering the first shutdown under Donald Trump in 2018, it was kind of like relatively equal. What eventually became a problem for Trump was a 35-day shutdown is, even though it was the Christmas season, people get sick of not having government services. And, you know, the federal government is the largest employer in the United States, which means that some 2 million people were going without pay for a month, especially during the Christmas season, right? And so it was starting to have all kinds of problems, and people were getting real sick of it, and that's eventually why Trump caved. So it's actually a real question on the Democratic side of whether they can stand up to a different administration this time around, which is basically going to use it as carte blanche to do whatever they want. Now, the Democratic base, I think, is probably radicalized enough to say Trump is going to do whatever he wants anyways, so don't cave. The Republican base also is one which is like, hey, great, we can continue to do mass deportation and fund the military. We don't give a shit about the Department of Education or the Department of Transportation. The risk will be probably something external. I mean, we're going into hurricane season, so you've got this whole National Weather Service problem, which was already having issues going into this. You just never know. What's some sort of external event?
Imagine this. The National Weather Service gets defunded. Everybody's furloughed. Maybe they're deemed essential and they still work, or maybe they're all sent home. Then you don't have people that can tell where the hurricanes are projected to go. Then when the hurricanes hit, then you don't have funding for FEMA unless FEMA's deemed essential. But that means the workers are good, but there's no money for the supplies that are needed. So things trickle down, and we can go down the rabbit hole of like worst case scenarios. I like to keep it more neutral on how it affects people on a day-to-day process rather than a worst case scenario when it comes to like hurricanes, floods, wildfires, things like that. But both sides can be true.
And that's when the shutdown politics can become very dangerous. There's also, people always point to this, but it is a real risk. Remember TSA and all these other, sometimes during shutdowns, you can have huge like airline delays, FAA, air traffic control, all kinds of crazy things can start showing up in people's lives. National Park Service, Obama famously shut all the parks during the shutdown. So it can start to show up in your life very quickly, actually, if the administration wants it to. And that's where I just have no idea where the politics is to go. Why would the Democrats cave? They have no incentive on their base other than an institutional love for the bureaucrat, or if Trump is going to try to break them, which I would not put past the current Democratic Party. So, but I guess there's a more moderate Republican faction also, which is like, hey, a lot of normal people like government services. A lot of people use the government every single day. So you have no idea how that will look like as well. The other question is whether the Democrats will hold up troop pay. That's always a big one. They probably won't. Everyone almost always funds the troops. There's like certain things like that. The question is whether Republicans would allow that to go through. So there's all kinds of
I would hope that you're still paying like the troops and our military if you can, because that's going to be messed up. You expect them to defend this country and to take a bullet for us, quite literally and figuratively. And you expect them to live with not getting paid. That's ridiculous on my end.
Nations that remain.
Well, and you know who doesn't get paid, who would likely be essential and continue working but doesn't get paid, would be ICE. So
they definitely are going to keep
Democrats
working.
have definitely, have taken note of the fact that the ICE thugs in the street would not be getting paid.
Yeah, but they're going to get their back pay eventually whenever it comes
but
back.
that's not fun to miss your paycheck for a while. For
no, it certainly isn't. Keep in mind, though, that they're not going to fire them. Any of these namby-pambies who are working in the DOE, you people are the ones who are going to be out on the streets.
They're already out. So
not all of them.
Education has already been broadly shut down. I mean, but that gets to the point of like the Democratic base. The Democratic leadership has tried to split the difference between what they think is the most politically palatable, broad message around a shutdown that puts Republicans on the most defensive, and what the base actually wants. What the base actually wants, yes, they care about healthcare, but what they really feel like is you should not be funding a fascist government. They would like to see conditions like the National Guard needs to be withdrawn. ICE agents need to be required to have their faces revealed and not be masked up. They want to see those sorts of, NSPM 7 needs to be like those sorts of checks on the Trumpian authoritarian crackdown is what the base actually wants.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen, right?
Well, but
they're not in power. Like, it's like you lost the election, you have a minority status. Like, why would they agree?
I'm just explaining what the view is, Sagar.
Sure,
So that's where the base is.
Okay.
The leadership is saying, like, we want to find the most poll-tested, friendly way to go about this that's going to put the GOP in the most difficult position. That's why they've settled on healthcare.
Which is why I say government shutdowns is a strategy. It is not a case of, oh my God, we can't make a deal, so we're just going to shut down because we can't come up with a budget. No, it's that, hey, our polls say that this is what our people care about. This is what we can say we want to demand to get one up over on the other party, because if we get shut down, they're the ones that are going to look like the bad guys. I hate political games, especially when it affects everyday people. Now, there is a tongue-in-cheek way where you can, not tongue-in-cheek, geez, I'd be like losing some of my wording sometimes, but there is a case where you can blame the everyday voter because we're the ones who vote these people into Congress. Yes, and in a way, I will agree with you on that. But it saddens me when these people are in office and they play games because they want to one-up each other, not caring about the fact that you are affecting people's day-to-day lives.
An irony here, too, because actually, Republicans, in a sense, would be doing themselves some favors to just go ahead and fund this healthcare stuff that the Democrats want, because it's a genuine political problem for them that you have massive Medicaid cuts in the big beautiful bill. You have, rural hospitals, many of them threatened with closure because of the funding cuts there. And then you have these skyrocketing premiums in the ACA that is going to hit some 20 million plus Americans at the end of this year.
And all of those are important. I am not saying that those are not important. What I am saying is let's talk about those things separately. Let's keep the government going. Let's keep getting our federal workers paid. Let's come up with something, even if it's a 7 to 10 day extension. And then we can fight over this part and try to get this resolved. But you're using healthcare, and you're using people's healthcare not as a way of trying to get a resolution sorted out because you really want to fix the issue. No, you're using that as a pawn to try to win over the other side. That is what the Democratic Party is doing. That is things that the Republican Party has also done when they would use shutdowns to their advantage to get things that they wanted to do. Both sides of the political aisle do it, and it's ridiculous.
That is coming really soon, before the midterm elections. So there are a number of Republicans who look at this landscape and are like, we actually do need to do something about healthcare. But their argument, you even heard it there from J.D. Vance, of like, oh, well, we can negotiate for it outside of this. You shouldn't be using the shutdown to get your healthcare way. But in any case, that's what makes it a difficult political question for them, because it is actually a problem for them politically.
Havana. Nobody's at the door, girl. Nobody's there.
That people's healthcare costs are going to be going up, and their local rural hospitals are going to be threatened with closure because of the actions that they've taken. Now, do I think that means that Republicans are going to like cave on that? No, not at all. But it is an intelligent place for Democrats to sort of like place their chips in terms of the messaging. I think the natural landscape, the natural political landscape sort of favors Democrats, number one, because they're not in power, and number two, because people associate shutdown politics and chaos more with the Republican side. But Republicans and Trump are much more effective messengers, much more disciplined messengers. They have much more backbone. They're much more clear. They're much more willing to, they're better at this, right? So that gives them, that's why it becomes kind of a toss-up who's ultimately going to win in the battle of public opinion, because Democrats have some natural advantages here, but they have Chuck Schumer as a leader who is already, his denials notwithstanding, already trying to look for a way, an escape hatch out of this, where he can look like he put up some sort of a fight, but didn't rock the boat too much in a way that is uncomfortable for him as someone who is not a boat rocker.
Obviously, I'm biased, but to me, Jeffries and Schumer just look incredibly weak. Like, and I think a lot of the Democratic, like, to me, I
think that's just a factual. Okay. I don't even think that's bias. I think that's just factual.
Because the healthcare, the way they're talking about it, I'm like, oh God, just shut up. You know, it just looks like it came out of some polling memo that was put on your desk.
I agree with Sagar. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I've seen him all over Boiling Points. I've seen him on Flagrant Podcast. I've seen him, I think, on the Iced Coffee Hour as well. I agree with that. Yes, they look weak, but also just shut up. Let's just get this going. Like, get everybody back to work. Stop making this like a big spectacle that it shouldn't have to be.
I don't know. I just think that, and at the end of the day, I mean, look, I get it. You know, like, oh, we want to, stop ICE. It's like, well, win an election. Well, it's not going to happen. So, like, that's where it just seems that the Democratic base, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, it's a lot like the Republican base back in the 2000s, where Obama what did he say to Eric Cantor? He said, elections have consequences, famously during a shutdown fight. In a way, that's true. It's like, dude, if you lose the election, you can't just come around demanding that the country be run exactly the way that you want it to be run.
On the other hand, they got a lot of what they wanted out of those shutdown fights. I mean, do you remember the whole, what was it called, budget sequestration?
But that's not what they wanted, per se.
But they were out of power, right? In even more dramatic, I mean, they, were out of power in a more dramatic way than the Democrats even are right now. And they still were able to, effectuate some of their goals and get some of what they wanted by using these power politics. Because the reality is Republicans do need Democrats in order to fund the government.
Yes, that's right.
Now, the other dynamic to keep in mind here is, like, there are some Democrats. So part of why, the reason why Schumer immediately came out after the backlash and was like, oh, I don't want a 7 to 10 day CR, wasn't because of what the base wants. It's because there were Democrats, elected Democrats, in the House and in the Senate that were like, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. Absolutely not.
There you go. There you go. This is what I was saying. It's not the voters that are saying that you have no backbone or that Schumer is being weak. It's the politicians themselves. Holy cow. It's like if you actually open your eyes and see what these politicians are doing, you can tell when they're feeding us BS and when they're doing stupid things because they want to get their way. Holy cow. It's like it's common sense or something.
And so, but you only need 7 Senate Democrats to be able to pass this bill.
It's just not that many.
So if you can make a few of them a little nervous, that's all you really need as a Republican to be able to ultimately get this done.
You want to know how to make a congressperson nervous? They have to be up for re-election in November. If they are faced with the threat that they will be voted out, they will do whatever they need to do to keep their seat. So if enough people in, let's say, New York or in Montana even, or in Michigan, if enough people are federal workers and are pretty much laid off of work for enough time, that politician is going to start sweating about the idea that, hey, my constituents are threatening to vote the other way because they haven't seen a paycheck in X amount of days, weeks, months. Like, that's how you get that's how you get politicians to move. But if they feel like their seat is safe, if they feel like their control over power is secure, they will drag their feet for everything. That's why everybody believes Congress drags their feet on so many things, because unless they're up for election or unless they're up for re-election, they don't have to make any moves. They can just sit around, blame the other party, and say that is it.
So, you know, the fact that Schumer's already looking for the escape hatch here and trying to figure out how to back down from the shutdown threats, I think is very revealing, even though he's now denying this particular mechanism is on the table.
It also gets to my grassroots point that I made yesterday. I don't see, like, are there groups out there calling for a shutdown?
Yeah.
So, because, but not in a
Invisible
high-profile
among them.
way, right? Like, this is the thing people need to remember. During the Obama administration, when those Republicans were going for a shutdown, it was, imagine, like, Fox News, you know, the entire Tea Party apparatus, all of the conservative radio hosts across the country, Eric Erickson, Rush Limbaugh, all these people, it was one message: shut it down, shut it down. Like, they had the apparatus, they had the calls. I don't see that right now. Maybe I'm biased. You know, obviously I don't watch MSNBC. I don't engage as much, but even the liberal pundit class, I don't see in a full-throated way. I mean, we had Ezra Klein, for example. Remember, he's like, well, I think shutdowns are terrible, but, you know, maybe we should shut it down to show. It's like, dude, what? Just say shut it down. Like, it's a much more clear message. Like, the pundit class, I don't see the MSNBC class and others united in a fervent message.
Okay, I'll say this, and this is probably an unpopular opinion. The reason you don't see it from, like, an MSNBC or maybe even a CNN, pretty much news sources that lean either to the bit or all the way left, is because they're afraid of offending people. Fox News or any kind of right-wing, lean to the right kind of news organizations, they are blunt with it. They will tell you, we need to shut down or shut it all down. And the people that lean to the left are a little hesitant on that because their base, their audience, are people who feel like you need to, like, really watch what you say, because anyone and everyone can and likely will feel offended about something.
Discipline. That's kind of why I would put my money on the Republicans for this one, because they're clear. They're like, look, we want to fire these people. We're just going to fire them. And so, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to call your bluff. You people love bureaucrats so much. Come and save them then, you know, if you want to come and fund the government. I would probably put my money on that. Well,
and this is where it gets back to what I was saying about what the base actually wants them to fight on.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right that there's definitely not as much of an organized and, like, clear, like, you know, the Tea Party position was oftentimes, you know, completely unreasonable. They wanted things like balanced budget amendments, and we're not going to increase the deficit or the debt whatsoever. And this is all just, like, preposterous given the basic math of what was going on here. But they they were sort of locked into a clear goal, and they had organized around it, and they had Tea Party movements across the country and all of that. And you're right, the similar like parallel organizations and institutions don't exist on the Democratic side right now. And I think that some of the energy that could be around the shutdown fight is also undercut by the fact that rather than the leadership going for the things that the Democratic base really wants, which is, like I said, to stand up against some of the like authoritarian overreach, the National Guard in the cities and things like that, it's sort of because it's this like poll-tested healthcare thing. Again, not to say it's not important, not to say that people don't care at all. That's just not the thing that is highly motivating the Democratic base right now. Right. And so that also saps some of the energy that they could be getting from the grassroots around a strategy. Whereas if they were, you know, if they were going more in that direction, I think you would see more of that like organic support. The other thing I would say is like they just didn't particularly message around this at all until like 3 days ago. So, you know, that makes it difficult to rally grassroots-based support when they don't know what you want, where you are. Like there is no leadership coming from the top of the Democratic Party for people then to rally around.
I just don't get the Democrats. I really don't. Because Mitch McConnell...
Neither do I.
It's like, what are you guys doing? Mitch McConnell, the most honest thing he ever said in, what was it, 2009, right after Obama's inauguration, and they're like, are you going to work with Obama? And he's like, no, I have one job. It's to make sure he doesn't get reelected. That's it. That's the whole job. It's so... That's why balance... But it's all bullshit, okay? Like, it was all just... wrapped up, as many Democrats said at the time. They don't actually care about any of this. Yeah, you're right. They wanted to wound the president. They wanted to inflict pain on the administration and to make sure that they caved in some way so that the Republican base could feel like they were doing something about it. That's it. I mean, I'm not quite sure yet what the base is so animated about. In terms of my neighborhood, the no king signs are everywhere. That seems to be like the uniting thing. Fine, whatever. But my point is just when you look at Chuck Schumer and all of those people, they don't talk that way. Like, you know, they're poll testing. They're not coming out and being like, we hate Trump, you hate Trump, we're going to do everything in our power to make his life hell. That seems to be that's the uniting message, right?
Correct.
If you're a Democratic base.
Yes, correct.
You know, if you're an anti-ICE poster and you're some no kings boomer lady who lives in my neighborhood, there you go. You're together, right? On that one. It's the most uniting message. And yet they're like, it's not just the poll testing. I don't know. I just see such lack of organization. I also see lack of stars. Where is Buttigieg? You know, he's doing Andrew Callahan's Patreon, you know, and the guy, we don't even have to hear what he has to say. Where is Chris Murphy? I just interviewed the guy. He's made a couple of comments. He's not on MSNBC the way that Mike Lee and Ted Cruz were. I mean, these guys were firebrands. Emily, by the way, did an incredible monologue with her and I on the show about the shutdown fight. And she pulled a bunch of clips back from 2013. Everyone should go watch that if you're interested, to mirror what their successful playbook was and how they were able to rise to stardom. Yeah. I don't see a single Democratic senator doing any of that.
That's a good point.
I'm like, where is the leadership? Like, where, even Bernie, where are you, dude? Like, you should be laying stuff out. Barnstorming, podcast scene, everything should be united around this. Things are disparate. You know, you said indivisible. I didn't even know. I definitely knew that about the Tea Party groups. Remember the Moms Against Obama? You know, like all Moms for whatever organization. I'm even blanking on these names. It's been so long.
But I mean, the Tea Party chapters were genuinely like across the country. Yeah. Your point about the stars is an interesting one too. And this again comes from the very poll-tested, like, let me sort of triangulate what the best place is for us to make our stand, because then you don't necessarily have people in the coalition, like elected leaders in the coalition, who are like, this is my thing, this is where I'm going to make my stand, etc. And so in the Tea Party era, you had Ted Cruz, you had Mike Lee, you had Paul Ryan was there in the mix, Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, like you knew who these people were, and they were constant hardline spokespeople rallying the troops to the cause. And you don't have anything really approaching that on the Democratic side, partly because it's, they were very unified behind two things. One, let's just fuck up Barack Obama's presidency, and number two, like this fiscal austerity thing that, of course ends up.
And the whole point that I'm getting off of like the last couple of minutes of me watching this is, once again, the whole point of threatening a government shutdown is to get what you want, A, but to also hurt whoever is in the White House, B. You heard him say it was the same thing with the Obama administration, Same thing with Trump's first administration. Same thing with the Biden administration. And it's the same thing that's going on now. Politics is a game of games, I should say. It's kind of like being in a real life version of Alice in Borderlands. There's all of these mini games that are going on with politicians, whether it's with billionaires or with billion-dollar companies or with them just not liking the opposition on the other side. It is so ridiculous even calling it opposition because, like I said in the very beginning, their job should be to prolong this country and to make it as effective, as efficient, and most importantly, as productive as possible. But it seems like all politicians nowadays, maybe even for decades even, or even longer than that, all they care about is keeping in power and making the other side look bad. And that is horrible because, unfortunately, that means that we pay the dividend for that. We're the ones, people who are on the ground level, everyday people in the United States, are the ones that are paying the bill for politicians wanting to play games with each other.
Being nonsense, but that's what they were all very committed to at that moment, right? And you just don't have that same sort of direction within the Democratic Party where the leadership is aligned with what the base wants and is consistently messaging on, you know, a few core things that the base really wants to see them fight on, even if they know that it's kind of like a losing battle. They just, I think you're right, that really the energy is just they want to make things difficult for them.
That's right.
They want to put them in a difficult position and you know, for their leadership to get caught fighting. And that has yet to happen.
Look, I mean, you can't absolve, you know, I just checked Bernie's timeline. He doesn't have a single tweet about shutdown. Like, what are we doing here? You know, like, where are you people? You're not on TV? Like, you know, AOC, all of them. I don't know what it is. It's like some weird Norm's brain virus that has infected all of them, where they've attacked the. It's like they don't want to be called out for hypocrisy. By the way, guys, I don't even think JD would care about saying this. He was tweeting about shutdowns 2 years ago.
Right.
He was like, why wouldn't we use shutdown to compel? Why wouldn't we use the power that we have to shut down the government?
How could they use the shutdown about leverage? Like, how dare they?
Right. Nobody's going to be like, oh, but the hypocrisy.
The hypocrisy politics, they're dead.
Right.
You know, not everyone's a hypocrite.
Get over it.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. They don't care about that. So why do you? Where are you? You know, I don't know. If I was one of those, you know, boomer women who I live around, I would be so mad at Chuck Schumer and all those people right now.
They are.
Like, what are you doing?
Well, and that's
Nothing.
the thing is they are.
Yeah.
You know, that's what's really different right now is people really liked Nancy Pelosi. Like the Democratic base really liked Nancy Pelosi, you know, and listen, in her absence, she's way better than Hakeem Jeffries. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
as a strategist, as a spokesperson, as someone who has the appearance of a spine, like she was a much more effective leader. No doubt about that. And it just, I don't know, there was a different moment. Now there is a real sense that the Democratic leadership has capitulated, that they've led them, you know, them off a cliff, that they have decided just to like curl up in fetal position rather than fighting, as Trump has ramped up his attacks in a much more aggressive way than we ever saw in Trump 1.0. And so there is a complete disgust and fury at Democratic leadership right now that is so different within the Democratic base. And that is going to express itself in some places. I don't know if it's, you know, I don't think it's going to be in the shutdown fight, but down the road in primaries, in terms of 2028, you know, the direction of the party, there is no doubt that that rage and disgust that the Democratic base has with their own leadership is going to be expressed and have consequences at some point, which is why Schumer's doing this, because he knows on some level that their grip on the power within their own party is at stake right now if they don't at least appear to try to do a little bit of something.
He's looking a lot like John Boehner to me right now, so we'll see.
It's ridiculous, if I'm being honest. This whole government shutdown thing is not going to be good, but I'll be curious to know how it does lay out over the next coming days, weeks, months, even if this does last. But like everybody, at first, when I first heard about it, before my best friend started working for TSA, I thought, why would I care? Like, it doesn't affect me as a person on a day-to-day basis. But that's where this video here from CNN, which actually released, what's today, the 2nd? It released today. Why you should care about a government shutdown. And it's definitely an overperforming video compared to what they do. So let's see what they got to say about it.
What's up, everybody? Rise up. Today is Thursday, October 2nd. Also National Custodial Workers Recognition Day. They say a tidy space helps us keep a tidy mind. We owe so much to the people who help keep our schools, offices, airports, grocery stores running smoothly. So be sure to give them a high five, fist bump, or hard hands today. Let them know I appreciate you. A lot of news to get to, not a lot of time to do it, so let's get to it. We begin in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., where the federal government has shut down for the first time in more than 6 years. It comes after Congress failed to reach a funding deal to keep the government open by their October 1st deadline. It is unclear exactly how long this shutdown could last, as lawmakers on Capitol Hill remain divided on key parts of a deal to end it. What is clear, however, is that many government services and workers could now be affected. We're talking potentially even the folks who deliver your mail. Let's bring in our Betsy Klein for a closer look at what and who this shutdown could impact. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Coy. Well, the U.S. government officially ran out of money when the clock struck midnight on Wednesday, and that means that all the money the government spends every single day on programs affecting all Americans has been shut off. Now, the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives are working around the clock to reach a deal to fund the government, but there's still enormous disagreement on how to get that done. When the government is shut down, nearly 3 million federal workers immediately stop getting paid, and that puts an enormous burden on many federal workers, especially those who live paycheck to paycheck. Now, some of those workers are deemed essential, which means they have to work without pay, and some are furloughed, which means they are forced to take a break from working.
I'll be honest, probably comment down, like, which one would you rather do? Would you rather be furloughed and basically sent home and say, yeah, you're not working until the government is back on its feet and the money's rolling in again? Or would you rather be deemed essential and have to work, but you're not going to get paid until the budgets come back? If you ask me, I'd rather be furloughed, because I would rather be sent home and be told, hey, come back when the budget is done and we're good to go. Because at that point, I could just get another job while you're dealing with that furlough. I could go for Uber Eats, I could DoorDash, I could do whatever it takes to make sure that there is some income coming in. But if you're going to tell me that I still have to come to work and my paycheck ain't coming, that's time I'm wasting coming to work for money that is not going to be paid until the government decides that they want to get their stuff together. That's horrible. And I know that for certain that people who are deemed essential workers and that they have to go through this as their reality are going to be sick of this, and they're going to eventually quit themselves and go find something else. Because you're not going to tell me that I'm going to have to work for this time because people that are sitting all day in Congress can't seem to make up their mind on whether or not that they want to pass a budget. It's just insane.
Department and agency has its own set of plans and procedures detailing who's essential and who isn't. Now, that can vary from shutdown to shutdown, but here are some examples. U.S. servicemen and women are essential workers, so they'll keep working without pay. Still, a shutdown could put national security at risk, since many of the civilian workers who support them will be furloughed. And while TSA agents and air traffic controllers are all essential workers, many of them can't afford to work without pay. The last time there was a shutdown,
they can't. Like, I've seen TSA agents make like, what, 40, 50,000? Which, okay, if it's a single person, but if you have a family, you can't really do that. And a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. They can't survive off of that money alone. So how do you think they're going to survive when the money's not coming in on time?
Down back in 2019, there were major delays at airports across the country because many had to call out sick just to find other ways to make money. And the court that provides marriage licenses in Washington, D.C. isn't processing those licenses right now, so you can't get legally married in the nation's capital during a shutdown. National parks are staying partially open. Open-air sites and trails will remain accessible to the public, but visitor centers and parks that require staffing, like the Washington Monument, are going to be closed. In past shutdowns, we've seen those surrounding facilities closed with trash piling up and toilets overflowing. all Smithsonian museums and the National Zoo have enough money to stay open until October 6th. A shutdown will also not affect zoo animal care. Those employees are essential. And there are lots of other impacts to services we all depend on. The key question now is how long this will last and whether Congress can come together and reach a deal. The last time this happened was back in 2019, and it lasted 35 days, Coy.
Thank you, Betsy Clown.
I feel like if you ask me how long this is going to last, because how divided we are as a country and on both sides of the political aisle, I could see this beating that 35 days. You could easily see this thing going like more than a month, maybe 45 days. But at that point, if it goes longer than that, you will start to see some very, very mad people out there.
Next up in weather news, a rare pair of hurricanes spinning side by side.
Whoa, 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 whoa. You're going to give me hurricane news now? Nah, yeah, we're done with this video. Okay, so apparently this, start that over. So apparently this shutdown is supposedly different from ones that we've had prior. Now, while I do agree that a lot of the times shutdowns are just threats to get what they want, let's see what CNBC has to say about why this is so different. Now, I will say I will take this with a grain of salt because CNBC does tend to lean left with a lot of their news articles. So the different may be about something that's like against the right and how it's their fault. But I'm going to go into this with an open mind and see what they got to say.
Shutdowns are actually a bit more common than probably perceived. We've had 20 of these shutdowns. It's often just political brinksmanship.
I think is really simply a response to showing that they're willing to fight Trump.
The president's doing kabuki theater. He's threatening to fire a bunch of employees if we don't keep the government open.
Federal government says shut down on October 1st.
Democrats are really trying to make this fight about health care. But Republicans are betting that they won't be successful, that people will just see Democrats as holding up a shutdown, potentially leading to a large-scale federal layoff.
I have a feeling that everything that I've said in this entire live stream is about to be repeated.
The fiscal year starts from October 1st and runs all the way until September 30th of next year. So every year on September 30th or around this time, there's a question whether or not the government is going to be funded.
We are going to give them every opportunity to vote for a clean CR.
For Republicans, it's a time to show that Democrats are blocking the way to keeping the government funded, trying to paint them as
Oh, Lauren's in the chat. Hey, Lauren, it would have broken my heart if my children refused to support the same presidential candidate as the Jan 6 rioters. I made sure they voted for someone who was found liable for sexual abuse. Lauren, Streamlabs, it's okay. Lauren, I completely get where you're coming from. And I do get it because growing up in my family, we grew up basically learning to vote a certain way. And listen, I get it. You vote for how you want to vote. If your children, you want to raise them however you want to raise them to vote, that's perfectly fine. I don't care who anybody votes for personally. If you want to vote left, vote left. If you want to vote right, vote right. If you want to vote Trump, vote Trump. If you want to vote Kamala, if you want to vote Hillary Clinton, if you want to vote AOC, because I feel like she's going to be up for election in 2028, that's perfectly fine. I don't care who sits in the White House. I care more about the average everyday Americans being able to earn their paycheck for what they do for work. That's why I'm doing this stream about this shutdown, because there are now hundreds of thousands of people that are facing furloughs and are either not working or working for free. That's what I care about. I personally don't care who's in the White House at the end of the day.
reasonable.
We're spending about $7 trillion this year. Now, we're only talking about 25% of the budget, which is the discretionary spending. Obamacare is the root cause of all these problems. It is skyrocketing healthcare costs, insurance costs, and all Democrats want to do is throw more money at it. We want to bring down healthcare costs in a reasonable way.
Well, Democrats say the only way they are ever going to give Republicans the votes they need to keep the government open is through something on health care.
And what we know is that failure to extend those tax credits is going to see insurance costs rise for over 20 million people, and about 4 million people lose their health insurance entirely.
For the government to avoid a shutdown, you need 60 senators to vote for approving any sort of stopgap or funding bill. If you do the math, Republicans only have 53 Republican senators. That means they need at least 7 Democrats to join them. And frankly, because Rand Paul tends to vote no on these continuing funding bills, they're likely going to need 8 Democrats. Now, you have one already, John Fetterman, who has come out and said he doesn't think that a government shutdown is ever a good idea, that it ever helps people. And he has come out.
I will say, as far as politicians go, I love John Fetterman because he really just does not care. He'll tell you how it is, and he'll do it while showing up to Congress in a hoodie and shorts.
And supported the Republicans' legislation, but at this point, you don't have any other Democrats who have done so.
My guess is we probably will shut the government down.
This shutdown is a little bit different because we're seeing something that we've never seen before, which is the federal government not just saying that they will furlough federal employees, but they will actually fire and lay off federal employees who are considered.
Hold on. Director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budgets. Agencies are directed to use this opportunity to consider reductions in forced notices. I want the full context of this, but if this is true, again, like I said earlier, it's horrible that you use a federal government shutdown as a way to just lay people off and fire them. But at the end of the day, that is exactly what the current administration has wanted, to limit the government size, to shrink it. And this is just pushing them more to the thing that they are trying to attain, their goal. So unfortunately, it's looking like it's going to happen.
Non-essential. So the Office of Management and Budget, run by Russell Vought, came out with a memo to agencies just the other week saying, hey, as you furlough employees, consider whether or not you really need those roles and consider shrinking down your agencies so it's only essential employees, as well as programs and agencies that are in line with the president's agenda. Now, he didn't go into detail about exactly which agencies those would be.
And I will keep saying this. I don't care about the president's agenda. I don't care who is sitting in the White House. I care about everyday people. And if you're saying, hey, while these people are furloughed, you should probably consider laying them off, that is horrible to me. Because at the end of the day, these people likely have families, and very likely they have bills that they got to pay. So you're taking away someone's livelihood for the simple fact that there is a government. It's one thing, I'll say it like this. It's one thing if this was just a regular sense of layoffs, and it's a whole other thing to strategically make a government shutdown just so you can do this. Is this the only reason? Probably not. But the fact that they are taking advantage of this opportunity and to do it is where I just find it messed up.
But we can guess based on what the priorities of the Trump administration have been, probably means things like Customs and Border Protection, ICE, military, policing would all maintain funding levels and staff, or maybe things like, say, the Department of Education would be more at risk for cuts. Democrats have basically come out and said that this is nothing more than an intimidation tactic. They point out there have already been massive reductions in the federal workforce, and that Russell Vought doesn't need a government shutdown to ask agencies to lay off individuals. Meanwhile, you have seen the Supreme Court bring some initial rulings out that lay a path for the Trump administration to fire.
The Supreme Court allows Trump to proceed with large-scale government agency staff cuts, reorganizations,
more workers. So there is.
But that was as of July of 2025. So yeah, this was 2-3 months ago.
Is more of a risk here if a shutdown does happen, because you could see a massive shrinkage in the size of government.
Those federal workers would be certainly impacted in a major way. If I look at the overall, economy, we're talking about 160 million people employed, over 160 million employed, and the federal workers, the ones that are potentially furloughed, is probably about 800,000. This big debate about the employment picture and inflation, and if we go into a government shutdown, some of that data releases, even the upcoming employment report, would potentially not come out. So all of a sudden, you have the Fed heading into a meeting with less information, which is already, a difficult decision. I mean, I think what would happen is that the Fed would start looking even more on outside private data, but it certainly complicates things at a time where there's a lot of tension in the Fed's mandate and that employment versus the inflation side.
I mean, obviously, it's a big deal for the government employees that are furloughed or fired, but from a broader economic perspective, not so much.
The economy tends to take a little bit of a short-term hit during the shutdown, and then there tends to be a rebound thereafter as well. So you're seeing the kind of the same picture play out in financial markets. When you look back historically, leading up, there tends to be a little bit of volatility, but during the actual shutdown, the market has actually been about flat.
When it comes to the FAA, airlines, you usually see longer lines for planes when a government shutdown is going on. The U.S. Travel Association estimated that during a shutdown, about $1 billion for the travel industry has lost a week. That's from flights, that's from rail, that's from people not visiting U.S. parks and national monuments, which are closed during a shutdown. Would it be smart for the government to avoid having to do shutdowns by automatically continuing funding when they get to this point? Probably. But much like the fiscal cliff and raising the debt ceiling, it takes away this key point of leverage that really forces lawmakers to sit down, come to the table, and hash out an agreement. Much like the debt ceiling and the debt.
And then people look at me, sorry, this is a complete sidebar. People look at me crazy when I say that the United States is run like a business. And this is just one of the things that proves my point. Like, people use shutdowns as a point of leverage when coming to the negotiating table. That is something that you hear about multi-million and billion-dollar acquisitions and mergers between companies. Not typically something you would associate with the government of a country. But unfortunately, this is the way that the government is run. And unfortunately, they said 800,000 federal employees, their employment status, their paychecks, their day-to-day living is contingent based on a handful of people in Congress that we have voted for. I will admit, we voted for them, going against each other back and forth and claiming to do it for our best interest. That's where I have a problem when it comes to shutdowns and things like this, and budgets not being passed, and legislation taking forever to be passed. That's where I have my problem, is that we voted for these people because we thought they would act in our best interest. But what they do is essentially act in their own best interest. And that's what I get sick of.
Limit, it's something that Congress is just going to continue to wrangle over year after year.
Any old ways. I do want to go back to that comment about this one right here from Russell Vogt. I definitely want to get the full context of this because, again, it just tells me whether or not it's messed up. VOUGHT. I'm asking Grok this one. Can you give me the context of Russell VOUGHT comments that agencies whose employees are being I'm a horrible speller, so don't mind me for this. Should consider firing them and shrinking their agency. I just want full context of this. And this is something I implore everybody to do. If you see something, because a lot of these news agencies will just put clips in to make it sound as bad as possible. Take the time to actually, something didn't go as planned. Okay, well, I'm going to run it through ChatGPT then. Hopefully this says, because what Vo is floating here is pretty radical and controversial. Let me lay out the context, what he's proposing, and the arguments for or against, so you can really dig into this. I do my chat GPT whenever I'm doing anything for like live streams or video content, so it knows that like the reason I ask a lot of questions is so I can get context for these videos. So let's see. First of all, is the director for the Office of Management and Budgets. The OMB has a central role in overseeing federal agencies, budgets, appropriations, and how funds are spent. He's been closely tied to Project 2025, the conservative plan to reorganize and shrink federal government and executive branch power. Oh my gosh. Now I'm going to get a bunch of comments about Project 2025. I'll deal with that in another day. Some reporting describes as one of the anarchists pushing for sweeping agency reshaping. Over recent months, the administration is already... Okay, but I want to know the context of what he said. What exactly did Vo in the White House say or imply? Okay. OMB memo sent ahead of the shutdown. Agencies were instructed to prepare reduction in force plans. These plans would go beyond simple furloughing and move towards permanent cuts, eliminating positions entirely, especially in discretionary programs that lapse in funding or are not aligned with the priorities of the administration. Ideas that the shutdown, some agencies are part of them whose funding is disrupted, could see entire job lines permanently eliminated rather than being temporarily suspended. Vo and the White House have suggested that when employees are furloughed, it's an opportunity to reconsider which roles are truly necessary, implying that some can be fired outright instead of paused. There are proposals floating to fire as many as 16,000 federal workers in the near term. That's according to the Washington Post. The White House, in defending this, has argued that the president has constitutional authority over the executive branch staffing and that the RIFs are accepted or permissible under the supervision. Additionally, Trump and Vo have tied cuts to which agencies get to stay and which are Democratic agencies. See, this goes to my point that they're using this as like an opportunity to basically achieve a goal that they set. I don't believe you should be able to use shutdowns for these things. I say it to the left. I say it about the right. It's messed up because you're basically playing around with people's livelihoods. And unfortunately, that's just how governments want to roll and want to play things out. And unfortunately, because a lot of us don't pay attention to politics on a day-to-day basis and only pay attention to politics when we are either watching the news or it's time to vote, we don't see some of these things happening. And unfortunately, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Or when you see it the first time, you think, oh my God, it's this party that's doing the wrong. No, it's both. Both sides literally do this every couple of years or every year when it comes to the government shutdowns. They use a shutdown to their advantage to get the things that they want to get done. Or if a certain administration is in power, they want to get something done on their own, they will use whatever means they have in order to make sure that their job is completed. It's messed up. I know I'm stumbling on a lot of my words, but it's because I've said it for the last hour and 45 minutes on this live stream. It shouldn't happen. It's wrong, but unfortunately, this is how the government likes to play its cards, and people are not seeing this. All right. We talked a lot about the people who are being furloughed or the people who are deemed essential and are basically having to work for free. Now we're about to actually see and talk more about these. This is coming from Boss from Home. She has 236,000 subscribers. We're about to see her video, which is also blowing up, and know what's going on when it comes to this.
Today is October 1st, the official start of this new fiscal year, and instead of stability, we're now waking up to one of the most chaotic days in U.S. government history. So not only are we facing a government shutdown, but over 100,000 federal workers are resigning today under a program that was designed by the Trump administration.
But the government has shut down, and I don't even know what's going on. I'm going into the office. Y'all.
Government shutting down. You're going into the office and likely not getting your paycheck until 30 days from now.
This has been such a roller coaster ride as a government worker. I've worked for the government for 35 years and I love my job, and it was always like the safest place to work as far as security, you know. So for this to be happening is like, wow. Now, we've been through stuff like this before, but there was never threats of layoffs and things like that. So for that to be in the air is like, wow. It's real crazy.
And so this is being called the largest mass resignation in U.S. history. And the ripple effects could actually hit everything from Social Security offices to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And yes, the job market too. And as someone who was a part of the Great Resignation back in the Panini times, this movement feels like deja vu all over again, but on a massive national scale. So stick around because I'm going to be sharing some TikToks from federal workers.
But I will say, before we get into the actual, like the actual reactions and the TikToks and all of that, I will say this. The difference between the Great Resignation and what we are probably going to see during this government shutdown is the fact that the mass resignation was due to the pandemic, but it also caused a massive employee market where essentially you were able to job hop and go and find roles every couple of months or so that was willing to pay you 2, 3, 5 times even more than what you were currently making. I know people who were able to like double and triple their salary just off of the back of the fact that so many people resigned from their jobs that companies were just throwing the Brinks truck at people in order to rehire. The difference now is that we are in a massive employer market. Jobs are not easy to come by. You could see TikToks of people who have applied to hundreds of jobs and have not been able to get a single call back. And on top of that, you're going to add another 100,000 people who are going to be entering the job market because they're going to leave their jobs. And guess what? A lot of these jobs, if it's true what the government is going to be planning to do, those jobs will not exist, which means there is no jobs to be filled in that area then. So what we're going to see is an influx of people entering the job market along with the people who are already in the job market for the very limited amount of roles that are out there. So I will keep telling people, if you want to quit your job, whether it's a federal job or a regular job in the private sector, please have a plan ahead of time. Don't just quit because the vibes are wrong or you don't like your manager or all of these reasons. Have another job lined up or have significant amount of savings, because this job market is just going to be more difficult if these 100,000 federal employees actually quit and enter the marketplace itself.
On the ground, breaking down what all of this means for you guys as the job seekers and asking the real question here. What happens to everyday Americans when the government workforce disappears overnight?
Okay, day one of being furloughed, guys. So I just got an email saying that I've been placed on furlough status. However, during this period, I may be contacted at any time and instructed to perform specific expected work. So I'm not getting paid. I can be on call basically, and I can't go on a cruise because I was like, oh, maybe I'll go on a little vacation or something.
And that's the reality for so many people who are furloughed but deemed essential workers. They're going to be like on call 24/7. You have to go to work, but guess what? You're not going to get paid until the government resolves their things with the budgets. So you're dealing with people who are essentially stuck. This person here wanted to go on a cruise. That's one way to think about it. There are people who would have used this time to get another job, which means that they could possibly leave their federal job for good and have something in the private sector that would work, or they'll pick up shifts through the gig economy that can basically temporarily alleviate them over time. But unfortunately, they can't. And that's the reality for a lot of essential federal workers.
Negative. I have to be available at all times with no pay. Zero money. On call.
Horrible.
I'm furloughed.
Horrible.
Fuck.
So officially on furlough as of midnight. It was more like 10 p.m. because when the Senate goes home, like, they're not solving anything in the next 2 hours. So we've known since about 10 p.m. that we were going to be shut down. But even though I'm not essential, I still have to come into work today because we have to conduct some shutdown stuff, namely giving enough information to our contractors to make sure that they have enough runway, that they don't run out of things to work on. Fun conversation as I pulled up to the gate, though. The gate guard said good morning, and I said, happy who the fuck knows what's going on for the foreseeable future day, and he went, you know it.
But yeah, what's the verdict? We are all furloughed. So, until further notice, today at 5 p.m. Will be our last time on the job. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's crazy, like, being an adult and life just be coming at you fast, bruh. I swear to God. And I feel like life has just been smacking me. Like, this year, I feel like it's been smacking me. It's been very real. So, I mean, this isn't something I ever thought that would happen, but it's happened. It's happening to a lot of people.
I feel like a lot of people who, like, this is their first federal job. Like, here's the thing. Federal jobs are, like, advertised to us as, like, one of the safest jobs you could get. I remember this specifically when I was always told to apply for the post office because the benefits are great. The pay might not be the best, but the benefits are great. It's one of the safest jobs you could get. Federal work is pretty much safe from, like, economic issues, any kind of things of that sort. Like, any kind of, like, mass layoffs you would see or instances where a lot of people lose their jobs, it's typically in the private sectors. It's very rarely in, like, the public sector, in the federal government, or anything like that. But what they don't tell you, and you wait until you experience this for the first time, is that when Congress says that the government is going to shut down, that's when this becomes a reality for people. And this is when a lot of people, where this is their first go around with it, actually experience it for the first time or hear about it for the first time. They don't know that these things are going to happen or that these are possibilities until it actually happens. I remember this hearing my best friend who works at TSA. When she didn't know about how shutdowns work and all of that until she was already in the process of joining TSA. That's when it came out, like, hey, if the government shuts down, you still have to work, but you're not going to get paid. Or if you're not essential, you're going to be sent home and you can't come back to work and you're not going to get paid until we solve this issue. Unfortunately, a lot of people go through this on the federal side and they have no idea about it until it actually happens to them.
And, I just gotta make it work, keep it moving, and focus on what I can control, which is how I spend my time, how I intend to, live my life and sustain myself beyond this job. I'm glad I already paid my rent. I will be getting a paycheck next.
Wait, hold on. I gotta take care of something real quick. I will be right back. Okay, we're back. And we're all good now. Problem resolved. Got to go back to this.
It's Friday. Yeah, after that, there will be no paycheck for this period, for as long as this furlough is occurring, and it can be a week, it can be a couple days, it can be a month, like who knows.
And the worst part about it is while all that's happening, bills are still due. Bills got to be paid. Rent's got to be paid. Mortgage got to be paid. Food got to be bought and put in the fridge. That's what makes it worse. This is why I keep saying, like, Congress is messing with people's day-to-day lives by doing this. This is more than just, oh, we want to get this certain piece of legislation through. No, it's about the fact that real people who have real jobs through the federal government are basically being put out of work because of this.
There will be no paycheck for that time period. So this is day one of me being furloughed. I have not yet signed my paperwork, so I'm actually going into work now, sign my paperwork, secure my area, tie up any loose ends with my workload, and I think I have like 4 hours to do that. So I'll be handling that for the greater part of the morning. And then after that, I believe I'm just going to be doing whatever I please. Hopefully it only lasts about a week or so, because I can't really see this. I can't really see me being like as non-stressed as I am now.
Havana, there's nobody at the door.
If this lasts beyond like a month is probably like the most that I am prepared for at this time. So I pray to God that it does not last any longer than that.
I'm hoping it doesn't last longer than a month, but compared to the last time that there was a government shutdown, which was 2018, which was under Trump's first administration, I believe, and the fact that that one lasted 35 days, and unfortunately the division between left and right, Democrat and Republican, has just gotten worse to the point where I do believe we're probably going to see a longer thing than this.
Captain's log day one. As a non-accepted, furloughed government employee, signed my counseling paperwork, created a wicked, awesome out-of-office message.
Ooh, sorry about that. Call from the family.
I should probably share that. That was pretty classic. And then...
Wait. I want to read that. Hold on.
I should probably share...
Wait, I'm currently out of the office because the government is on a little pause, aka shutdown, which means I've been furloughed. Think of it as an unpaid vacation without the vacation. During this time, I won't be checking emails. I'll be busy catching up on long overdue tasks like reorganizing my sock drawer, teaching my houseplants motivational speeches, and considering a side hustle as a professional rapper or social media content creator. If your request is urgent, please contact USAHC. Otherwise, I'll get back to you once the government power is back on. Warm regards and unpaid time. That is actually a funny, like, out of office email. That's somebody who probably took this a little bit light compared to most people, but that's one way to deal with it.
That was pretty classic. And then I went to the mailroom and got our mail. And then I went to the commissary and got a sandwich. And then I texted all my parents for like the kids that I coach for soccer and let them know that the world is not on fire and we will still have practice and we will still have games. So I would say morale is at a 10 out of 10. Let's check back tomorrow.
Welcome to day one of the government shutdown. Now, unless you've gotten word from your organization, you should be at work, probably. So we're just waiting around to see what we hear, if we will be furloughed or not. I'm sure all of the leadership are in meetings. I'm remote, so I have to get stuff through the grapevine. But you should be waiting on your organization to let you know if you will be furloughed or if it's business as usual. Don't take it upon yourself to say the government is shut down. I'm not going to work. Don't lose your job because you think you know something that you may not know. Because agencies have different types of funding. Some agencies are funded multiple years and it doesn't impact, the shutdown won't impact them at all. Whereas you have some agencies within an organization that it's a single year and they may not be funded and they may get furloughed. So follow your procedures as usual and let them guide you on what you need to do next, okay?
And that is probably one of the smartest pieces of advice that I've heard when it comes to this government shutdown, is the fact that your specific organization may not be as affected by this as you may think, depending on if your agency has already been funded, depending on whether or not you're going to be furloughed, whether or not you're deemed essential. Like, always best to defer to your actual organization where you actually work, and don't just read the headline saying, hey, government shut down, everybody's furloughed, and think, well, I'm not going to work, and then essentially losing your job because of an assumption.
Hey, don't assume, don't take nothing into your hands, go to work.
All right, it is day one of the government shutdown. What does that mean for us active duty personnel? That means that we got paid on the 1st, but as long as the government is shut down, we will not get a paycheck on the 15th. This, of course, has caused a lot of financial worry and burdens amongst all of our active duty personnel, especially those that are living paycheck to paycheck.
Which, like, based on what I've seen people in active duty military make, because with the U.S. military, you can kind of get an idea what they make because it's kind of publicly out there. It's pretty easy to see why it's easy to go paycheck to paycheck being active duty military. The pay is not that great. It could stretch depending on where you're based out of. But if you're based out of certain parts of the United States, you are automatically paycheck to paycheck instantly. Now, don't take my word for it. I've never been in the U.S. military. This is just based off of things that I have found, research on the internet, and just assumptions based on cost of living in certain parts of this country. If somebody who watches this is active duty military or even reserve and has an opinion on this, I would love to hear it.
So my call of action for you today is to stop living paycheck by paycheck. One thing that I want to make sure everyone's aware, and I want to say this delicately because I am active duty, is that the government shutdowns are happening more and more often, which
that's true.
I don't see it lessening as politics have become more polarized.
Very true.
They separate people. People are, split in between a line and not knowing how to disagree to agree, or agree to disagree, or debate and stuff like that, and just be good with having a difference of opinion. So I see this happening more often, not even to mention, as somebody in the Coast Guard, people may not know, but when the government shutdowns happens, it actually affects our retirees also. So our retirees won't get paid. So imagine being retired from the military, you've done your service, and now the government shutdown is going to cause you to not get paid in your retirement. And so
that means, like, even if you're not, like, if you're retired, your pensions, you're not getting paid that. That's wild. And I will say this, because he made a really good point on this. Part of the reasons why, like, the government shutdowns have been happening more and more often is simply, again, because we're so much more divided as a country as we've been decades prior. Prior to, like, the last maybe 20 or so years, you could agree to disagree with someone based on what side of the political aisle you're at and still have that mutual respect. Now it's gone to a point where if you even lean slightly one way or the other, you are basically automatically labeled as, like, part of the extreme left or the extreme right, just because you have an opinion that leans slightly one way or another. And that is not just on the everyday person. That trickles up to the government as well. And unfortunately, the government is just as polarized as we are down here on the ground level. So unfortunately, it's gotten to like this ridiculous point where it's causing us to basically become, how do I say this properly? It's gotten to a point where these kinds of situations with like government shutdowns because people can't agree on a certain thing happening more and more each time. And it's just insane.
So this is why I say, like, this is definitely my point of view, is that the government was not designed to fully always take care of you. I'm pretty sure it shows by actions now that we're not their highest priority. And so my whole point of that is not to like bash, but the whole point is that you can't count on the government, and you need to take ownership of your finances, of your own financial destiny. You need to be in a place in life to where if the government shuts down, like how I am in this situation now, that you really don't care because you have other financial resources that you can depend on.
So this is the reality for more than 100,000 workers today. And so that means today, October 1st, thousands of desks are empty and agencies are scrambling. Workers are sharing their shock in real time on TikTok. But it's not just the workers who are shaken up right now. The services that you and I depend upon are about to feel it as well.
So we're all in agreement on this, right? If the government does away with the healthcare subsidies and all of our premiums go up for next year and they're just way too expensive, we all just stop using insurance. And then if we get sick or need medical care, we just show up to the hospital. And when they give us the bill, we just don't pay it. Let the system collapse. Let it crumble.
And I will say, once again, personally, I'll get two different things. That is the supposed bill that's like keeping the government shut down, continuing. That is like the reason why we have this shutdown. Fix the shutdown, deal with the healthcare at the same time right after, but keep them separate. Don't add the healthcare to the continuing thing, to the CF or CR, continuing resolution, CR. Don't add it to the CR and make it one big paperwork, and then Congress has to take their time reading through it and arguing about it to pass it. No, do the continuing resolution, do the healthcare, fix whatever you want to work on, whether it's healthcare, housing, anything like that, but do them as separate bills. I don't understand why that's so difficult.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, October 1st. Let's get into the shelter and housing perspective about the government shutdown, and let's talk about what we might see and how this might affect you, or if you are on Section 8, you rely on these subsidies, and if you were in a shelter. I'm only going to talk about a couple of things because it's still really too early to go over the most important details. So as we know that the shutdown can have a serious wide range of effects, so let's look at this breakdown on how this may impact shelters, voucher holders, and housing programs. So immediate impacts of the federal government shutdown on shelters and housing programs. So we know that HUD is operating on a slow, or they're halting a lot of their businesses. So most of HUD staffs are furloughed, leaving a small skeleton crew to manage essential tasks. Renewals for Section 8 project-based rental assistance contracts may be delayed if the shutdown lasts more than 30 days. New grants, contracts, and funding approvals are paused, affecting shelters and housing providers relying on federal support. Okay, housing choice vouchers. Let's get into Section 8 for a second. Payments to landlord may be delayed if HUD systems are inaccessible for funding and runs out. Public housing authorities may face uncertainties and administrative delays, especially if they rely on HUD systems for processing payments. Shelter operations. Shelters funded by federal grants like ESG and COC may experience delays in reimbursements or grant renewals. Staffing shortages at HUD and other agencies can slow down technical assistance, compliance checks, and reporting. So again, the short term, under 30 days, if this does go for under 30 days, most programs will continue without minimal disruption. But if it lasts longer than 30 days, funding gaps may force shelters and housing providers to cut service, delay payments, and even pause new intakes. So this is what we're looking at. Of course, there's more, but this is just from a shelter and housing assistance perspective.
And I will say, because this is my realm of expertise, being that I work in real estate and I've been doing housing for the last 6 years. If it takes more than 30 days, this is where you really will see the pressure going on Congress to like get something passed. Because this is going to affect a whole lot of people. This is going to affect the people who are on like Section 8, housing choice vouchers, any kind of government subsidies, anybody in the shelters, because now you're dealing with workers not being there, services being slowed down, and because the money won't be coming in if the budget runs out, now you're getting the landlords involved because the landlords aren't getting their rent for their tenants coming in. Now you got an issue with everyday people who are living with these vouchers, and you're dealing with the landlords that are relying on the income from these vouchers. And that's when you'll start to really see pressure kicking in. So, personally speaking, based on all of this, I think the first week and a half, nothing's really going to happen. I don't think this government shutdown is going to have any progress within the first 7 to 10 days. But once you start getting into like day 14 and then day 20, closing in on day 30, that's when you'll start to see the pressure build up just a bit. And that's when you'll start to see Congress talking more and more. And maybe, hopefully, before 30-day mark, that's when this will all be fixed. And everybody's paid, and then the country runs as normal for at least the next year. Do I see that happening? Probably not. But at this point, with how divided the country is, that's probably best case scenario.
So this is where it really gets scary. The Department of Veterans Affairs and the Social Security Administration, they're all places where people are counting on that consistent service. And so we could see slowdowns or outright shutdowns in those areas. And the timing could not be worse in 2025. With inflation already crashing and crushing households, delays in checks or benefits, that could mean that real people are not able to pay their bills, buy food, or even cover their rent. And so here's where I think job seekers like you will want to pay attention to this. So because when 100,000 workers suddenly hit the job market all at once, it changes everything.
Good government job. Millennials, remember our parents used to be like, just go to school and get you a good government job. Don't nobody want that good government job no more. That good government job, just make sure you keep your good government job. Don't nobody even want it no more.
And this is what we were all taught growing up. We were taught that getting a government job or working for the federal government was one of the best jobs you could get. It was one of the safest jobs you would get. You wouldn't have to worry about all the issues that a lot of people deal with working in the private sector. Well, guess what? We're in 2025, where multiple times throughout your tenure of that good government job, you're going to have to deal with Congress deciding, hey, we're going to threaten a shutdown, which means you're not going to have a job, or we're going to tell you to work basically for free until we decide to get things moving again. The good government job that we were all taught growing up is no more. Now at this point, it makes a lot less sense to get a government federal job, depending on which agency you're working with, than it is to get a job in the private sector. Because at least the money's more with the private sector.
2025, they don't. I asked and they told me they don't want it no more.
What's official, we do have a government shutdown, but that's not only the bad news that we have today. You go over to the jobs report. The jobs report looks dismal. So let's get over to the economic calendar so I can go through these numbers with you kind of briefly. Here's where the payroll numbers came in at. ADP said that previously there was supposed to be 52,000 jobs being created during this cycle. Actually, there was a negative 32,000. That was the revision.
So for federal employees,
think about that. Negative 32,000 jobs. So we are in a market, in a very hard job market, where it's very difficult to find a job right now. And you are essentially, if it is true what these numbers say, having 100,000 people from the federal government, basically who work for the federal government, coming into the job market. What do you think that that's going to do when it comes to finding a job? that's going to make things more difficult. That's going to make this already employer market just that much harder. So I will say it again. Hold on to the job that you are currently on unless you can find something else in the meantime. Don't make it to where you quit your job. And by the way, I will also add this. If you are an employee that is just skidding by and thinking that you are flying under the radar at your job, you might be at risk too. Because if employers find out that they can get better talent for the same price that you're being paid, and you are essentially trying to fly by the wayside and just do the bare minimum, you could easily be just as replaceable at your job as somebody who's not doing their job at all. And that's just the ugly truth about employer markets. There is way more demand. Not demand. There's way more supply when it comes to ready, able, and willing workers, especially in any industry that doesn't require specializations, than there are a supply of actual jobs. And unfortunately, when you get to that point, that is going to make these job numbers that are coming up just that much uglier. And unfortunately, I'm not looking forward to that because that's going to drive the economy in a full-blown panic.
Private sector might seem like the next move for them, but here's the problem. When tens of thousands of highly skilled workers are now entering the job hunt all at once, it will get much more competitive for you. And so let's be real, many of these jobs, they don't exist at the same scale outside the government. So that means that underemployment, also gig work or flat out unemployment for a lot of people is something that could happen. For many people, this isn't just a job, but it's their identity, their community, their retirement plan. And so now they're being thrown into the job market that is already brutal in 2025. So here's a question for you. What would you do if you suddenly lost your job like this? Would you pivot maybe into different industries, start a side hustle, or would you just take a break? Let me know your comments.
All right, I'll answer this. If I were to suddenly lose my job, like right now, like not being essential, meaning that I would have to go to work, but furloughed completely, my thing is I'm going to take my skill set and I'm going to try to find another job in the private sector. Like, I am going to put out hundreds of resumes to try to get a job in the private sector. I don't care, like, what industry it is. As long as my skill set can pivot into that role and I'm making somewhat similar money, if not more, I'm going to try to do that. Because, unfortunately, like we saw in a TikTok prior from the gentleman who was active duty military, he said it loud and clear. These kinds of shutdowns are happening more and more often. So what's to say that you're not going to be dealing with this next year or 2 years from now or even 3 or 4 years from now when the next president is in? You can't say that you're not going to deal with it. Likely you will. So take this opportunity and try to pivot into the private sector. Or if you have like money aside that can survive, that like you can pay your bills and stuff and you can survive, then maybe start something on the side. Start a business, become a content creator, whatever your passionate interest lies, maybe try that during that time. I would do one of those two things depending on how I'm doing financially. But if you are somebody who is living paycheck to paycheck, I would say go for that private sector job. Like, do what you got to do.
Thoughts down below. I'm curious to know how you would handle this. So here's the bottom line here. Today marks not only a government shutdown, but it also marks the largest federal resignation in U.S. history. The services that we rely on, like the Social Security services, veterans programs, and everyday operations are now all at risk. And 100,000 people just became job seekers overnight. So this isn't just Washington drama, but it's about real people, real families, and the workforce that seems broken. So if you've been following my cost of living crisis series here on YouTube, you know that this is part of a bigger story about money, jobs, and survival in 2025. So I'll link the playlist right here so that you can catch up if you're interested. And also don't forget to subscribe, because in the coming weeks, I'll also be breaking down what all of this means for us. So whether you're job hunting, you're trying to save money, or you're just trying to survive this economy, you'll find this series to be relatable and interesting, to say the least. So if you are a government worker and you feel comfortable sharing, let us know how you are handling things down below. Or if you are a worker, period, that has recently been laid off, let us know how you are doing down below in the comment section. I'll be down there with you guys, so I would love.
Look, I will say this. I did have 3 other videos and, well, 4 other videos. But honestly, it's got me basically repeating myself, so I'm just going to say this. The problem we're going to see with this government shutdown is this. Right now, there are tons, and I mean thousands of people who are without work right now. They are either working essentially for free, meaning that their employers are like, yeah, you still have to come to work, but until the government stops the shutdown, you're not going to get paid. Or they're completely out of work for the time being. And this is just going to get worse. Depending on how long this shutdown is, the worse it'll get. You already heard stories about 100,000 people that are already about to quit their jobs and get into an already difficult job market, which means it's going to be even more difficult. You already heard about services that you and I and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people use on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis, that is going to be dealing with a severe slowdown, if not a full-blown stoppage, because of this shutdown. So, what do I think is going to happen? It's this. With how divided we are as a country, this shutdown is going to last at least 30 days. I can't see the members of Congress, both Democrat and Republican, actually working together the first 2 weeks to get it done. I feel like both sides are going to dig their heels in, drag their feet, and essentially still push to get their way. And then the louder that the everyday person gets about not being able to get paid, about not being able to fund their lifestyle, about not being able to pay their bills, that's when the pressure is starting to grow. And that will grow when we are towards the end of this month and rent becomes due on November 1st. So when that happens, we'll talk more about it. We'll keep you updated on how this shutdown is going. And until then, I will